A veteran officer thought he was just teaching another disrespectful outsider a lesson. He slapped the handcuffs on, ignored the calm warnings, and dragged his suspect into the precinct. What he didn't know. The man in cuffs held the keys to his department's survival, and one phone call was about to end it all. The town of Oak Creek, Pennsylvania, was the kind of place that time and economic progress had largely left behind. Surrounded by rusting steel mills and fading infrastructure, it was a town where local authority was absolute, and the Oak Creek Police Department operated less like a public service and more like a private fraternity. For years, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division had been receiving a steady stream of complaints about Precinct 42. Allegations of systemic racial profiling, unlawful detentions, and excessive force had finally reached a critical mass. Enter Devin Reynolds. Devin was a 48-year-old senior federal auditor for the DOJ, a meticulously organized black man with a law degree from Georgetown and 20 years of experience dismantling corrupt institutions. Devin was not a man who intimidated easily. He had faced down organized crime syndicates and rogue federal agencies. Oak Creek was just another file on his desk, but it required a personal touch. The federal government was preparing a massive consent decree, but Devin needed on-the-ground verification before dropping the hammer. On a biting Tuesday morning in November, Devin sat in a rented, unremarkable grey Ford Fusion across the street from Precinct 42. He was dressed in a casual beige trench coat, a simple grey sweater, and slacks, deliberately unremarkable. On the passenger seat sat a locked, reinforced Pelican briefcase containing his federal credentials, classified audit parameters, and direct contact lines to a federal judge. Devin had a simple objective for the morning: observe the 8:00 a.m. shift change. He was silently logging uniform compliance, squad car conditions, and the general demeanor of the officers interacting with the public outside the station. He held a small black moleskin notebook, writing down badge numbers and timestamps. Across the street, Officer Thomas Gallagher was nursing a styrofoam cup of black coffee. Gallagher was a 20-year veteran of the force, a heavily built man with a ruddy complexion and a reputation for a hair-trigger temper. In Oak Creek, Gallagher's word was law. He didn't like the look of the grey Ford parked in front of the diner across from his precinct. More specifically, he didn't like that a black man he didn't recognize was sitting in it, staring at his station and writing in a notebook. Gallagher tossed his half-empty coffee into a trash can, hitched up his duty belt, and marched across the two-lane street. Devin saw him coming in the rearview mirror. He didn't flinch. He simply closed the notebook, placed it in the center console, and rolled down his window halfway. "Morning," Gallagher barked, leaning heavily against the door of the Ford. His eyes darted around the interior, searching for probable cause. "You lost?" "No, officer. I know exactly where I am," Devin replied, his voice calm, measured, and devoid of the deference Gallagher was accustomed to. Gallagher's jaw tightened. "Is that right? Because you've been sitting here for 45 minutes, staring at my precinct. What are you writing down in that little book?" "I'm just taking some notes. Is it illegal to park here?" Devin asked, gesturing to the lack of restrictive signage on the street. "I ask the questions," Gallagher snapped. "Hand over your ID." Devin kept his hands resting clearly on the steering wheel. "Officer, unless you suspect me of committing a crime, I am not obligated to provide identification under Pennsylvania state law. I am legally parked on a public street." It was the absolute worst thing Devon could have said to a man like Gallagher. The assertion of rights was perceived as a direct challenge to his authority. Gallagher's hand dropped instinctively toward his taser. "Step out of the vehicle," Gallagher demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "For what reason? Step out of the vehicle now, or I will drag you out through this window," Gallagher roared, drawing the attention of two other officers across the street, who immediately started jogging over. Devon knew exactly how these situations escalated. He unlocked the door and stepped out slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I am complying with your order, officer. However, I want to clearly state for the record that I do not consent to any searches or seizures, and I am formally asking if I am being detained." "You're damn right you're being detained." Gallagher grabbed Devon by the shoulder, spinning him violently and slamming him chest first against the roof of the Ford. He kicked Devon's legs apart. "You want to come to my town and play lawyer? Let's see how much you like our hospitality." The two backup cops arrived. One was a young rookie named Toby Jenkins, who looked slightly nervous but said nothing. Gallagher patted Devon down aggressively, finding his wallet. But Devon had deliberately left his DOJ badge locked inside the Pelican case. His wallet only contained his standard Maryland driver's license. "Devon Reynolds," Gallagher sneered, reading the ID. "Well, Devon, you're under arrest." "On what charge?" Devon asked, his face pressed against the cold metal of the car, his tone remarkably steady. "Loitering, suspicious activity, interfering with police duties. I'll think of a few more on the walk over." Gallagher laughed, clicking the steel handcuffs tight around Devon's wrists. They were painfully tight, biting into the skin. But Devon didn't wince. "Officer Gallagher," Devon said softly, having read the man's name tag earlier. "You are making a catastrophic mistake. I strongly suggest you reconsider this action." Gallagher leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "I don't make mistakes, buddy. You're in Oak Creek now." The interior of Precinct 42 smelled of cheap pine disinfectant and old sweat. Gallagher marched Devon through the double doors, a hand gripping the chain of the handcuffs. Rookie Officer Jenkins followed closely behind, carrying Devon's locked Pelican briefcase, which Gallagher had illegally seized from the passenger seat of the rental car. "Got a live one, Tommy?" The desk sergeant, a balding man named Miller, called out from behind bulletproof glass. "Just a tourist who thinks he knows the Constitution better than we do," Gallagher replied, shoving Devon toward the booking bench. "Sit down and shut up." Devon sat. His posture remained impeccably straight. He surveyed the room, his eyes acting as human security cameras. He noted the peeling paint, the outdated booking logs, and the casual brutality in the way the officers spoke to one another. He was gathering evidence by the second. Captain Richard Hayes stepped out of his corner office. Hayes was a sharp-featured man, wearing a crisp white shirt with gold bars on the collar. He had survived in Oak Creek by ensuring problems quietly disappeared and by aggressively shielding his officers from outside scrutiny. "What's the commotion, Gallagher?" Hayes asked, eyeing Devon. "Caught this guy casing the precinct, Captain. Refused to ID, got combative. Thought he'd play street lawyer," Gallagher said, dropping Devon's wallet on the booking counter. Hayes picked up the Maryland license. "Long way from home, Devon. What brings you to Oak Creek?" Devon looked directly at Captain Hayes. "I am exercising my right to remain silent. I will not answer any questions, and I am requesting my phone call." Hayes smirked. "Silent type. Okay. Book him," strip him of his belongings, and run his prints. Jenkins, crack that briefcase open and see what our friend here is hiding. Probably got outstanding warrants. Captain, Devon broke his silence, his voice ringing with absolute authority. That briefcase is the property of the United States government. It is secured with a biometric lock and 256-bit encryption. If any of your officers attempt to force it open, they will be committing a federal felony. I advise you to leave it alone. A heavy silence fell over the booking room. Gallagher scoffed loudly, but Jenkins slowly put the briefcase down on a metal desk as if it were a bomb. United States government, Hayes repeated, letting out a dry chuckle. What are you, a postal inspector? IRS? Listen to me, buddy. I don't care if you work for the DMV. You don't come to my town and threaten my officers. Run his prints. They dragged Devon to the live scan machine. Gallagher pressed Devon's fingers onto the glass scanner with unnecessary force. The machine whirred, processing the biometrics through the AFIS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System network. Usually, the system returned a match or a blank slate within a minute. This time, the screen flashed a solid red banner. Access denied. Restricted classification. Agency override required. USDOJ CRD. Sergeant Miller frowned, tapping the monitor. Captain? The system is throwing an error code. I've never seen this before. Hayes walked over and squinted at the screen. The acronym USDOJ sat there, glowing ominously. For a fleeting second, a shadow of doubt crossed Hayes's face. But his pride, built over decades of unchecked local power, quickly paved it over. System's probably glitching, or he's got some minor bureaucratic clearance, Hayes dismissed. Throw him in holding cell 3. Let him cool his heels for a few hours. We'll see how arrogant he is when he misses dinner. They marched Devon down a bleak, fluorescent-lit hallway and locked him inside a 6x8 concrete cell. The iron door clanged shut, echoing with an awful finality. For the next 4 hours, the precinct continued its normal operations. Every time an officer walked past cell 3, they expected to see the suspect pacing, panicking, or begging to be let out. The usual reactions from people who realized they were entirely at the mercy of Oak Creek PD. Instead, they found Devon sitting perfectly still on the edge of the metal cot, his legs crossed, his eyes fixed on the security camera in the corner of the room. He didn't ask for water. He didn't complain about the handcuffs, which they had vindictively left on him. He just sat there, exuding a chilling, terrifying calm. It was starting to unnerve the younger cops. Jenkins walked into the captain's office, looking pale. "Captain, something isn't right with this guy," Jenkins muttered. "He's not acting like a normal perp, and that briefcase, it has a titanium-reinforced shell. I looked up the model. It costs $5 grand. Normal people don't carry those." Hayes sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine. Give him his phone call. Let's get his 2-bit lawyer down here so we can cite him and kick him out of town." Gallagher unlocked the cell door, a smug grin still plastered on his face. "All right, Mr. Government. You get 1 call. Make it count." They led Devon to the wall-mounted phone near the booking desk. Gallagher, Hayes, and Miller all stood nearby, arms crossed, waiting to hear him cry to a local public defender or a frantic wife. Devon picked up the receiver with stiff, bruised hands. He didn't dial a local 724 area code. He methodically dialed a 10-digit number, starting with 202, Washington, D.C. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. Devon spoke clearly into the receiver, his voice echoing in the quiet booking room. "Director, it's Reynolds. Code Blue 7. Yes. I am currently unlawfully detained at Oak Creek Police Department, Precinct 42. No, I am unharmed. Yes, they have seized the audit files." Devon paused, listening to the voice on the other end. He looked up, his cold gaze locking on to Captain Hayes. "Understood," Devon said into the phone. "Initiate the federal takeover." Devon hung up the phone and stepped back. He looked at the three officers, who were suddenly standing very still. "My ride will be here in 20 minutes, Devon said. "I strongly suggest you start getting your paperwork in order." The silence that followed. Devon's phone call was heavy, suffocating, and entirely alien to the booking room of Precinct 42. For a fraction of a second, the illusion of absolute power that Captain Hayes and Officer Gallagher had built over 2 decades flickered. Then Gallagher forced a loud, mocking laugh. "Code Blue 7? Gallagher sneered, stepping aggressively toward Devon. "What is this, a Tom Clancy novel? Who'd you call, buddy? Your mother? The Geek Squad?" Captain Hayes managed a thin smile, but his eyes betrayed a sudden, gnawing anxiety. He looked at the AFIS machine, where the red federal restriction banner was still glowing on the monitor. He looked at the $5,000 Pelican briefcase sitting on the desk. He looked at Devon, a man in handcuffs who possessed the unshakable posture of someone holding all the cards. "Put him back in the cell," Hayes ordered, his voice lacking its previous bite. "Let him sit there until this imaginary ride of his shows up. Then we'll hit him with a false reporting charge on top of the resisting." Gallagher grabbed Devon's bicep and shoved him toward the hallway. Devon didn't resist. He simply glanced at the wall clock above the dispatcher's desk. It read 9:14 a.m. 19 minutes, Devon said calmly. They locked him back in cell 3. But this time, nobody walked away. Gallagher stood outside the bars, arms crossed, trying to project intimidation. But as the minutes ticked by, a strange paralysis began to grip the precinct. At 9:21 a.m., the precinct's main dispatch radio flared to life. It was the frantic voice of a local highway patrol unit. "Dispatch, this is Unit 6. We've got a situation on Interstate 79. I've just been ordered to halt all southbound traffic at the Oak Creek exit. State police are setting up barricades." Sergeant Miller grabbed his microphone, his hand shaking slightly. "Unit 6, who gave that order? Did the mayor authorize a roadblock?" "Negative, dispatch. It's not state boys commanding it. It's federal. They just blew past me. I'm counting. God, 6, 7, 8 black Suburbans and 2 mobile command units headed straight for downtown." Gallagher's face went pale. The smirk vanished, replaced by a sudden, sickening realization. He looked into the cell. Devon was sitting exactly as he had been before, legs crossed, eyes perfectly calm, waiting. "Captain!" Miller yelled from the front desk. "Captain Hayes, get out here!" Hayes burst out of his office. "What is it?" "The phone lines," Miller stammered, pointing to the switchboard. It was lighting up like a Christmas tree. "The mayor's office is calling. The district attorney is calling. And, Captain, the local FBI field office in Pittsburgh just called on the emergency red line. They said we need to step away from all secured areas immediately." Hayes swallowed hard. He looked at Gallagher, who was suddenly sweating profusely despite the drafty cold of the station. "Gallagher, what exactly did you see this guy doing?" "He was just sitting in his car, taking notes," Gallagher stuttered, his bravado entirely evaporated. He wouldn't show ID. At 9:32 a.m., a low, rhythmic vibration shook the frosted glass windows of Precinct 42. It sounded like a freight train rolling through the center of town. Then came the screech of heavy tires locking up on the asphalt outside. Before Hayes could even issue an order, the heavy wooden double doors of the precinct were violently thrown open. They didn't knock. They didn't ask for permission. Over a dozen men and women, wearing tactical gear, Kevlar vests, and windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI and U.S. Marshals, flooded into the lobby. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, immediately securing all exits, standing in front of the filing cabinets, and blocking the armory door. "Hands away from your weapons! Step back from the desks!" A booming voice echoed through the room. Leading the strike force was Special Agent Jonathan Pierce, a towering, silver-haired veteran of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. He walked past the stunned local cops without so much as a glance, heading straight for the front desk. Captain Hayes held up his hands, trying to salvage some scrap of his authority. "Hey, what the hell is the meaning of this? You are in my house, Agent. You don't have jurisdiction to just barge in here without a warrant." Agent Pierce stopped. He looked Hayes up and down with utter contempt. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick stack of folded documents, and slammed them onto the booking counter. "Federal warrant, Title 18, U.S. Code, Sections 241 and 242. Conspiracy against rights and deprivation of rights under color of law," Pierce recited flawlessly. "This precinct is officially under federal receivership. Now where the hell is Devin Reynolds?" Hayes pointed a trembling finger down the hall. Pierce marched down the corridor, flanked by 2 armed marshals. When he reached cell 3, he saw Devin sitting quietly in the cuffs. Pierce's jaw tightened in fury. "Keys!" Pierce barked over his shoulder. Gallagher, shaking so badly he could barely walk, fumbled with his belt, produced the small silver key, and handed it to the federal agent. Pierce unlocked the cell, stepped inside, and personally unlocked Devin's handcuffs. "Are you injured, sir?" Pierce asked, his tone shifting from aggressive command to absolute respect. Devin rubbed his raw, bruised wrists and stood up, adjusting his grey sweater. "I'm fine, Jonathan. Let's get to work." Devin walked out of the cell, not as a suspect, but as the apex predator of the room. He didn't gloat. He didn't yell. The sheer, cold professionalism radiating from him was far more terrifying to the Oak Creek officers than any anger could have been. He walked into the main booking room. The entire shift of local police stood frozen, disarmed both literally and figuratively, surrounded by federal agents. Devin walked directly to the desk where his Pelican briefcase still sat. He placed his bruised thumb on the biometric scanner. A green light flashed, and the heavy latches clicked open with a satisfying hiss. He pulled out his credentials, a solid gold badge sitting on thick leather, clearly identifying him as a senior auditor and special investigator for the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. He flipped it open and set it on the desk in front of Captain Hayes. "Captain Richard Hayes," Devin said, his voice cutting through the silent room like a scalpel. "For the last 2 years, the Department of Justice has been compiling a dossier on Precinct 42. We have documented 47 cases of illegal search and seizure, 14 cases of excessive force, and a systemic pattern of racially motivated harassment." Hayes wiped sweat from his forehead. "Listen, Mr. Reynolds, this is a misunderstanding. We police a tough town. Sometimes things get out of hand, but you didn't have to orchestrate a stunt like this." Devon stopped him with a raised hand. "This wasn't a stunt, Captain. The DOJ was preparing to issue a massive consent decree. It would have placed your department under federal oversight. But my superiors needed to know if the ROT was just a few bad apples or if it was institutional." Devon turned slowly, locking eyes with Officer Thomas Gallagher, who looked as though he might be sick. "Officer Gallagher answered that question for me this morning," Devon continued. "Without reasonable suspicion, without probable cause, you assaulted a man, illegally seized federal property, and locked an innocent citizen in a cage simply because his presence challenged your fragile ego. You thought you were above the law. You were wrong." Here was the twist that none of the local cops saw coming. Devon reached back into the Pelican case and pulled out a second stack of documents, heavily redacted in black ink, bearing the seal of a federal grand jury. "We didn't just come for an audit, Richard," Devon said softly. "We've been running a Title III wiretap on this precinct's landlines and your personal cell phones since April." Hayes physically stumbled backward, his back hitting the glass of the dispatch booth. You tapped our phones?" "Every single one," Agent Pierce chimed in, a predator's smile on his face. "We heard the kickbacks. We heard the conversations with Mayor Pendleton about falsifying arrest records to boost federal funding. The DOJ already approved a RICO conspiracy case against you, the mayor, and half your command staff." Devon stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the disgraced captain. "I was dispatched here this morning to personally serve the indictments to you and the mayor. The arrest warrants were already signed, but I decided to sit outside and see how your men treated a stranger. I was the bait, Richard, and your star officer swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker." Gallagher panicked. His instincts, honed by years of bullying people who couldn't fight back, entirely failed him in the face of genuine, insurmountable power. He took a sudden step toward the back exit. He didn't make it 2 feet. 4 U.S. Marshals tackled him to the linoleum floor, driving his face into the very same tiles he had thrown countless suspects onto. The sharp click of federal handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Thomas Gallagher," Agent Pierce read, looming over him. "You are under arrest for the deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault of a federal officer, and conspiracy. You're looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary." They hauled Gallagher to his feet. He looked at Devon, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "You set me up," Gallagher spat, blood trickling from a split lip. "No, Thomas," Devon replied evenly. "I just gave you enough rope. You tied the knot yourself." As marshals dragged Gallagher out the front doors to a waiting SUV, Devon turned his attention to the rookie, Officer Toby Jenkins. The young cop was shaking, tears welling in his eyes. He reached for his badge to unpin it, assuming his career was over. "Stop," Devon commanded. Jenkins froze. "You didn't lay a hand on me, Officer Jenkins," Devon said. "My audio recorder caught you trying to warn Gallagher to back off. You're young. You got caught up in a poisoned culture. I'm going to need officers who actually want to protect and serve to help rebuild this department under federal oversight. Are you willing to cooperate with the FBI?" Jenkins nodded frantically, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." "Good. Go sit with Agent Pierce's team." Devon turned back to Captain Hayes. The man looked completely hollowed out, a ghost haunting his own precinct. The empire he had built on intimidation and corruption had been dismantled in exactly 20 minutes. Agent Pierce stepped up and handed Hayes a copy of the federal indictment. "Turn around, Richard. Put your hands behind your back." As Hayes was cuffed and led away, Devon calmly packed his documents back into the Pelican case. He clicked the locks shut. The precinct around him was a hive of federal activity. FBI techs were ripping hard drives out of computers, seizing filing cabinets, and cataloging the armory. Oak Creek Police Department Precinct 42 no longer existed. Devon picked up his briefcase and walked out the front doors. The biting November wind whipped against his trench coat. Across the street, the grey Ford Fusion was exactly where he had left it. He unlocked the car, sat in the driver's seat, and let out a long, quiet exhale. He reached into the center console, pulled out his small black moleskin notebook, and crossed out the name Thomas Gallagher with a single definitive stroke of his pen. Then Devon Reynolds put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the flashing red and blue light of federal justice fading in his rearview mirror. And that is exactly how one undercover auditor tore down an entire corrupt police department without ever raising his voice. Devon Reynolds proved that true power doesn't come from a bully's badge, but from knowing the law and holding the ultimate trap card. Did Gallagher get exactly what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you loved seeing justice served cold, smash that like button, share this incredible story, and subscribe for more amazing real-life twists.